Mod 2, Lesson 2. The Europeans reached the Americas. If you were there, you were a European explorer who just returned to your homeland from the Americas. While you were gone, you tried new and different foods, including corn, potatoes, and cocoa. You have brought some of these foods back with you. You want your friends and family to sample these items, but they resist. What will you say about these new foods? Columbus sails across the Atlantic. Stories of fabulous kingdoms and wealth in Asia captured the imagination of Christopher Columbus, a sailor from Genoa, Italy. Columbus was convinced that he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. Columbus knew that the earth was round. In fact, the earth's shape was well known among educated Westerners. Columbus's plans included errors, however. He thought the earth was much smaller than it is. He also thought that Asia extended farther east and therefore that the lands he sought were closer to Europe. The journey begins. Columbus asked King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain to pay for an expedition across the Atlantic. He promised them great riches, new territory, and Catholic converts. It took Columbus several years to convince the king and queen, but they finally agreed to help finance the journey. Ferdinand and Isabella ordered Columbus to bring back any items of value and to claim for Spain any lands he explored. On August 3, 1492, Columbus's 3 ships set sail. The Nina and the Pinta were caravels. Columbus sailed in the larger Santa Maria. The ships carried about 90 sailors and a year's worth of supplies. They made a stop in the Canary Islands, and then on September 6, they resumed their journey. Soon they passed the limits of Columbus's maps and sailed into uncharted seas. After more than a month with no sight of land, the crew grew restless. Soon the crew saw signs of land, birds, and floating tree branches. Columbus promised a reward to him who first sang out that he saw land. On October 12, 1492, a lookout cried, "Land! Land!" ending the long journey from the Canary Islands. The ships landed on an island in the Bahamas. Columbus thought that he had found a new route to Asia. Instead, he had reached another continent that was unknown to him. Columbus called the island San Salvador, which means Holy Savior. Columbus also visited another island he called Hispaniola. There he met a group of native people called the Taino. At that time, Europeans called Asia the Indies, so Columbus, believing he was in Asia, called these Native Americans Indians. The Taino lived in small farming communities. In his journal, Columbus wrote that the Taino were so generous that no one would believe it who has not seen it. However, Columbus and his crew were not interested in Taino culture, but in gold. After 3 months of exploring, looking for gold, and collecting exotic plants and animals, Columbus returned to Spain. Columbus made 3 more journeys to the Americas during his lifetime. In 1504, he returned to Spain in poor health. Columbus died 2 years later, still believing that he had reached Asia. Impact of Columbus's voyages. The voyages of Columbus changed the way Europeans thought of the world and their place in it. A new era of interaction between Europe and the Americas had begun. Moreover, Columbus's voyages and voyages of explorers who came after him would set in motion the development of American society. Columbus's discovery also created conflict between European countries. Both Spain and Portugal wanted to add these lands to their growing empires. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI, originally from Spain, issued a decree that drew a new boundary for Spain and Portugal. This imaginary line of demarcation divided the Atlantic Ocean. Spain could claim all land west of the line. The Portuguese king believed that this arrangement favored Spain. To prevent war, the 2 leaders signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, which moved the line of demarcation 800 miles farther west. This gave Portugal more opportunity to claim lands unexplored by other Europeans. The Pope's decree and the Treaty of Tordesillas helped establish the idea that a country that explored a newly found land was entitled to own and rule it. This idea came to be known as the Doctrine of Discovery. By this doctrine, native peoples who had lived on the land for generations were considered considered occupants, not owners with property rights. The policy would have a devastating effect on Native Americans for centuries to come. Other explorers sailed to the Americas. Columbus's discoveries inspired others to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. In 1501, explorer Amerigo Vespucci led a Spanish fleet to the coast of present-day South America. He was convinced the land he reached was not Asia. Instead, Vespucci believed he had found a new world. A German mapmaker labeled the continents across the ocean America in honor of Vespucci. Europeans began using the names North America and South America for these lands. In a Spanish settlement in present-day Panama, another explorer, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, heard stories from local Native Americans about another ocean farther west. Balboa set out to find it. For weeks, he and his men struggled through thick jungle and deadly swamps. In 1513, they reached the top of a mountain. From this spot, Balboa saw a great blue sea, the Pacific Ocean, stretching out before him. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator, set out with a Spanish fleet to sail down the east coast of South America. After sailing around the southern tip of the continent, Magellan continued to the Pacific, even though his ships were dangerously low on food and fresh water. Magellan's fleet sailed across the Pacific Ocean. In the Philippines, Magellan was killed in a battle with native people. Down to 3 ships, the expedition continued sailing west into the Indian Ocean. In 1522, the voyage's only remaining ship returned to Spain. Only 18 members of Magellan's original crew survived. These sailors were the first people to circumnavigate to go all the way around the globe. Their entire journey was some 40,000 miles long. European explorers and settlers took plants and animals with them to the Americas. They also brought back a variety of new plants and animals to Europe, Asia, and Africa. This transfer became known as the Columbian Exchange because it started with Columbus's explorations. European explorers found many plants in the Americas that were unknown to them, including corn, potatoes, squash, tobacco, and cocoa. They brought these items to Europe where they were highly valued. Turkeys, too, made the journey from the Americas to Europe. The explorers introduced horses, cattle, and pigs to the Americas. Native Americans came to use these animals for food and transportation. They also started to farm Europeans' grains such as wheat and barley. Citrus fruits and sugarcane were other plants that came from Europe. These became important crops over time. Without intending to do so, the explorers also introduced deadly new diseases to the Americas. Native Americans had no natural resistance to European diseases. As a result, diseases such as smallpox killed from 80 to 95% of the native population within 150 years of Columbus's arrival. Not only did these deaths devastate Native American communities, they also had a terrible long-term effect. Soon after they established colonies, Europeans, especially the Spanish, forced Native Americans to work as laborers, raising food and mining for gold and silver. But because so many Native people died from the new disease, a labor shortage soon developed. The Europeans began looking for a new source of workers. They turned to Africa and began importing enslaved Africans. Over many years, Europeans shipped millions of slaves to the New World colonies. The Columbian Exchange changed the world for all time. Environments, agriculture, trade relationships, and even entire cultures were affected in Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Some changes, such as the death of Native Americans from new diseases, happened very quickly. Others happened more gradually. For example, as some mountain-dwelling Native Americans acquired horses, which had come from Europe, they moved down to the Great Plains. There, these people adopted lifestyles that depended on the buffalo herds. Over time, a trading pattern involving the exchange of raw materials, manufactured products, and slaves developed among Europe, Africa, and the Americas. This trading pattern would affect many aspects of history, both in the New World and the Old. Summary and preview. Columbus's voyages to America inspired other Europeans to explore the New World. This led to new exchanges between both sides of the Atlantic. In the next lesson, you will learn about Spain's empire in the Americas.